Right,
Welcome to the AWAKN podcast. My name is Gem. I am the award-winning author of the book Be Unmessable and founder of Another Way, a personal development company. And this dude is my son.
And my name's Slate. I'm an entrepreneur, and I am a lover of life's most intimate and vulnerable moments and everything that life has to offer.
That is awesome. Well, that segues perfectly into what are we talking about today? Talking about
Shame and vulnerability.
Shame and vulnerability.
Two topics that people do not like to talk about.
True.
Let's go.
True. It's what everybody hides from.
Yeah, which is so interesting. Because once you realize that, I'm going to rephrase. Once you realize that vulnerability is a strength, everything is way easier.
Oh my gosh, so true.
Especially communication and getting what you're actually looking for. Because so many times people are looking for something and they either can't communicate it, right? That's a whole different issue. Yeah. Or they don't want to go to the place of feeling vulnerable to actually say what they're looking for fear of judgment and shame in response.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to let people know the difference between guilt and shame. So guilt is, I guess for easy figuring, let's say you do something that someone may deem bad behavior. Guilt is an action. It elicits an action. So you feel remorse about what you did. It puts you into action. You feel guilty about it and you're like, ooh, I need to apologize, or I need to stop, or I need to change something. Shame is, let's say you do something that's bad behavior and then you feel bad about it. Like you are a bad person. I am bad because I did XYZ. That would be the difference.
So really the key to shame is the internal belief of feeling like because you've done something bad, that makes you bad.
Yes.
Am I saying that right?
Yes.
And what you're saying is that no matter what you do in life, just because you do bad things doesn't inherently make you a bad person.
Correct. It doesn't. It doesn't.
It makes you a human.
Bad things. Everybody does bad things.
Yeah.
One time or another.
Or many times.
Or many times. Some people are chronically bad behavior people.
But does that make them a bad person?
No, but it does give you history. So like if you're in a relationship where your partner is continually showing up with bad behavior, I can see where somebody wouldn't want to stay in that relationship because the bad behavior doesn't change.
Sure.
Doesn't necessarily make them a bad person, but does make them someone with chronically bad behavior.
Which is really the only problem is their problem. Right? Because if you decide to stay, yes, that's your problem.
Correct.
So whether somebody shows up as a person who is quote unquote always good or always bad, not always, but generally, really the only person that is to have ownership is the person who is showing up as that, correct?
Well, yeah, we're each responsible for our own experience here. So once you're, let's say you're 18, okay, for each figuring, it's like you're technically an adult. You've had your childhood experience. Your parents either showed up or didn't show up, or sometimes showed up, or whatever experience you had. Now you are responsible for your own experience. Now you've been responsible for your own experience longer than that, in my opinion. And we each get to our own understanding of what that really means at different times, right? Because some of us don't grow up in families where we get that teaching, where we realize we're responsible for our own experience.
For sure.
People put responsibility on other people, like your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever, or friends, like they're responsible for our experience. And that's technically not, it's just not a healthy way to operate in life.
Well, I agree with that 100%. And in addition to that, I think that going from a place of like giving the ownership to other people, to taking radical ownership over your life and what you're capable of,
Yeah.
takes you into a different category of, well, if something is not going the way that you want, or a relationship isn't happening the way that you want, you are the responsible party to either change that or to not change that. And once you realize that, you know, everything falls on your shoulders, then you have total control over what you bring in, what you let out, and what you decide to engage with or not engage with.
Totally. You empower yourself actually, because by taking
Perfect word.
responsibility, you realize you have way more influence over it. Then you stop yourself from being the victim all the time.
The victim mindset is a terrible mindset to be in. Oh my gosh. It's so sad. So sad to watch.
Yes. And I think we all do it at different times, right? It's like
For
we
sure.
could easily get into that mindset where it's like, oh my gosh, this person did this to me. And then it's like you feel however you feel about it. But if you really want to consciously show up in life and really empower yourself, you really have to get out of the victim mindset and realize that, it's kind of like when people say, there's a saying, you hurt me once, shame on you. You hurt me twice, shame on me.
Man, oh man, here comes the shame again.
I know. It's a phrase, though. That is like a saying. It's not one that I use, but it isn't often used.
But that does show you how deeply ingrained shame is in our culture, which is really interesting.
True. So let's circle back. How did we start talking about this? You're reading a book.
Yeah, on your recommendation, the book is Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. And I'll just read you the title page on what it's about. How the courage to be vulnerable transforms the way that we love, live, and parent and lead. Brene Brown, PhD. It's a phenomenal book. It's the first and only book in my life that I have spent 2 nights sobbing after reading it. And it's the only book that I've ever read that has like touched like my soul. You know what I mean? Like I've learned things in this book that I've never learned. Not learned is not the right word. I have engaged with feelings that have come about through this book that I've never had anywhere else, because of the fact that it leads you down this path of like being vulnerable. And if you are able to see the vulnerability within yourself, I mean, I never realized how much I struggled with shame, like throughout like my childhood, my teen years, even into my 20s. And even to this day, I struggle with it a lot less than I used to, I think. But if I'm being totally vulnerable with myself, I would say that I still struggle with it quite a bit. And I actually think it's the number one thing in my life that is the root cause of a lot of my turmoil, personal turmoil, is shame, which is disguised in many different ways, right?
Totally. And that's the whole thing. Once you get into the book, you realize it shows up in all sorts of different ways. People don't even realize, I think sometimes, that they're dealing with shame is really what's underneath, their angry outbursts and, all sorts of different behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah, one of the things is like perfectionism, where like let's say that you have a goal to let's say you have a goal to stretch 20 minutes a day, right? And you know that at the end of the day, you're tired, you worked all day, your kids are just got put down to bed, you've got all these things to do, you got laundry to do, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, damn, I know I'm not going to be able to stretch for 20 minutes. So instead of doing it for a few minutes and getting some of it in, you do none of it, because even though it's a goal, you can't do the full 20 minutes. And so you just do none of it. And what she says in the book is perfectionism is like the barrier between like just doing things on a consistent basis and getting them done, versus having a goal and slowly not doing your goal anymore because you can't do it perfectly. which is really interesting.
Yeah, perfectionism is totally something I can relate to in my earlier years, wanting to do things perfectly. One, because I didn't want, so my shame showed up is I felt stupid. Like I
Mm.
didn't want to ask questions because I felt stupid. Because I didn't know something. So if I had to ask a question, it was kind of like, oh, well, then I don't know. And if people know that I don't know, then I'm kind of screwed because then I'm dumb. Or stupid. It's funny talking about it now, but like at the time, it was horrible.
Oh, I can imagine. That
Um,
sounds god awful.
but then it sets you up, right? Perfectionism. Jeez, I mean, that's a tough one to reach because no one is perfect. I
Not at
mean, you can
all.
like strive for excellence and really, really do amazing things, but nobody is going to be perfect.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I don't think in any category people will be perfect. I am curious though, when you today, right? So you said back in the day you struggled with perfectionism. When you today are feeling like the shame
Mm,
build up and all of a sudden there's that like I feel it as like a physical heat,
mm,
like, and the heat quickly turns into anger for me when shame shows up. And
okay.
that, and I've learned that recently where all of a sudden like somebody will say something and I'll start to feel like physically hot, and
Mm,
then that heat turns right into anger,
yeah.
and that's how shame shows up for me. I'm curious, how does shame show up for you today?
Well, so I guess how does it show up for me today? Um, I still struggle with it sometimes when I make what I would deem a big mistake. Like, let's say I
Okay.
screwed up something in my checking account and, it was, it's not usually when it just affects me, but it's usually like if the mistake that I've made affects somebody else. So let's say it affects my husband as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your dad. and um and then I'm like, oh, and I get like for me, I want to hide. That's what it feels like. I just want
Oh,
to like
interesting.
cover up and just shrink back. And back in the day when I mean, you can imagine, right? You have little kids and you're growing a new family and you don't do things perfectly all the time. And you do make mistakes. I remember one specifically back in the day when you guys were little. We used to rent movies from Blockbuster
Okay.
because there was no streaming. And so you'd have to go to the store and you'd rent something, a VHS tape from Blockbuster. And then if you didn't,
VHS.
yeah, if you didn't return them on time, it was like $1.25 a day. And there
Okay.
would be times where, we didn't have a lot of money at the time and I didn't return them for like 3 or 4 days. And I was like, oh, fuck, I didn't return it. Now I've got like a $7 bill at Blockbuster that I have to pay before I want to rent another movie. And I would want to lie and I would want to hide and not say
Oh.
what happened. And today, when stuff like that comes up, I feel it. It doesn't feel as strong as it used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for what happens today is it'll come up and I hear like audio,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh my gosh, what a stupid thing you did. And now when I hear the voice come up in my head, I'm like, not really, and
Not
I can
really.
talk back to it, or
Yeah.
I can speak to it where I notice it now. But back in the day, I never, I didn't discern that until I was probably like 35.
Interesting. Okay. So I was just about to ask, what's the way that you deal with it? So you actually have a conversation with it, it sounds like.
Yeah, these days, yeah.
How interesting. How
And if I
interesting.
if I can't if I can't get rid of it that way, have you gotten to the point? Have you finished the whole book?
Now I've got probably, I don't know, 50 pages left.
Okay, so she talks about shame resilience. Have you read about that yet?
I have read some about that. Yeah.
Okay, so shame resilience, according to Brene Brown, is when you can share your shame experience with somebody who can meet you in that space with empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can share that with somebody and speak it out, it can no longer have a hold of you because it's no longer a secret. Like when you hold it inside and you don't tell anybody, it's like you have this secret and your mind kind of messes with you sometimes, like, ooh, but if they knew that about you,
I
then
know
they
that
wouldn't
well.
like you. Right?
Yeah,
That's what
for
used to go
sure.
on in my head. I was just like,
Yeah.
people like me. I'm super likable. I have lots of friends, but if they really knew what was going on inside my head, they might not like me. I was
Yeah.
scared. I was super scared to let people, like, I wanted to be known, but again, I didn't really want to be known.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about you saying that is I definitely have a very similar experience where I would say I'm pretty okay with sharing vulnerable experiences with people and even with friends or acquaintances. What's interesting about you saying that though is when I think of like things that I've done in the past where I feel shame for them,
Mhm.
I almost never share those with people. And probably the only people that I've ever shared those with is probably you, Dad, and Jade. And otherwise, probably nobody else on the planet's ever heard those stories. And what's interesting about it is, I think the key thing to remember here is that, like, um, when you have like one of those shame experiences
Mhm.
and you want to talk about it with somebody, you have to really be conscious about who you talk to it about with
100%.
to make sure they're a very safe person.
Totally. That's, I mean, I was oozing it, waiting for you to say something. I was hoping you were going to say that because I was like, don't just share it with anyone to get
No,
it
and she
out.
talks about that in the book
To
too,
have a
is
safe
that's
person.
actually a way that people armor themselves up, is by spewing out their shame and then, hoping that people are okay with it. And that's really a way of, not actually being vulnerable. That's
Right.
actually a way of combating vulnerability by putting on armor so that you're protected from feeling the vulnerability.
Yes.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's
Yeah.
very
Because
interesting.
really, I mean, when I started going through um, my own, personal growth thing when I turned 35, I ended up in a group of women, of probably like 20 or 30 women, and we got really close and were able to share what was, we had common things that we were struggling with. It was like a support group and it was at a church, and it was a place where people came together, and the container created, it was a safe container to share,
Mm-hmm.
where you knew you had confidentiality, you knew that you had people who were going through similar stuff, and so they had kind of an incentive to be there for you because they needed somebody to be there for them too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you can't just share it with anyone, because that's when you wind up, I mean, I don't know about you, but I know I've shared stuff before, and it's like, hey, oh my gosh, I felt like this. I couldn't believe this happened. And then you hear somebody and they're like, well, what'd you do that for? And you're like, oh, like,
Yikes.
that wasn't what I needed at all.
Seriously. And in addition to that, I think there's different levels to it, right?
Yeah.
Where like there's certain things that like have like a super high degree of shame, and there's other things that you're like, all right, I feel slightly shameful about doing that. And there's certain things where like for example, you say something in front of people, and let's say somebody else didn't even hear it, that you were talking about them, and instead of just brushing it under the rug and just being like, whatever, it's a moment in time, actually going up to somebody and being like, yo, I said something, I'm sorry for it, and it was not my intention to, blah 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 blah, but and speak to the thing without, you know I don't know, having awkwardness. I don't know. not a
Well, I
full
think
thought.
well, I get it. So what I'm hearing you say is you're someplace, you say something about somebody named, we're just going to call him Bob for easy figure.
Okay.
Okay. So you say something
Bobby.
Bob to a group of people.
Yeah.
And then you realize that it may have come off in a bad way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I think what I'm saying is when you say things like that, part of getting rid of the shame or being vulnerable is owning the mistake.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
And taking ownership and being like, all right, that was fucked up. I shouldn't have said that. And I'm sorry. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I think, go on.
Well, I was going to say, and the shame resilience part probably won't come from Bob. Like you sharing it with him, you probably won't get that empathy or compassion for what you're going through from him, because he's dealing with his own stuff, hearing that something was said about him, processing, the whole thing. So really for you to go to somebody else and go, dude, I just said something about somebody at a party and I didn't mean for it to come off the way it did, but somebody sort of took it another direction. And can you believe this? And then you get somebody who can go, oh, dude, I get that. I've had that same thing happen to me. That's where I think you find the resilience, the shame resilience, because then you realize somebody has shared, they can share the experience of that with you. And
I definitely agree with what you're saying. I'm also thinking about it from the perspective, and you tell me if you think this is valuable, is like the shame resilience piece, I agree with, but do you think that actually owning your mistake in front of the person affected is a good strategy for counteracting the shame, or do you think it's a bad strategy?
Well, I think it depends on the relationship that you have with that person.
Okay.
And I think anytime we make a mistake, I think it's great to own it, because I think it clears your own slate, so to speak. I mean, you have a clear page because it's like, okay, I owned it. Yes, I did this. And, now I'm looking to do something different. I'm looking to change my behavior and I'm going to move forward with a different plan or whatever it is. But anytime you make a mistake, I think that's a step towards, well, having someone forgive you, but then forgiving yourself.
Interesting.
But again, it goes to, if you look at the difference between shame and guilt. So let's say you made a mistake, you said something about somebody and it kind of went awry. And that's not what you meant to happen, but it did nevertheless. You can feel guilty that happened, and you can make amends, which is an action. You can apologize, you can change your behavior, you can do all, journal about it, whatever you need to do to get through it and move to the other side of the guilt. But if you let shame creep in and you keep it secret and you struggle with it on your own kind of thing, and you feel bad, like you're a bad person because you did that, that's where it hooks you into that spiral. There's like a cycle. So if you think about this, usually when you feel shame, it's because you've done something that you feel bad about, right? So
Okay.
bad feeling, then you feel shame. Then after that, there's like some way that you act out. And it could be a lot of different things. So somebody may hide, they may lie, they may drink, they may steal, like all these different things to make themselves feel better. They're trying to take that bad feeling and make themselves feel better. It's the way they're coping. And then after they do that, if it's not a healthy way of coping, then they feel bad again. And then the cycle starts all over again. That shame.
So part of the healing process is actually finding healthy ways of coping.
Well, totally. And shame resilience, like Brene Brown talks about, is, one of those ways of coping would be to share what it is with someone who can meet you in that place with empathy and allow you to get it out. It's the secrets. The secrets are what keep us sick.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
Pretty cool, huh?
Very interesting, because I'm actually thinking about my own personal experiences and things that I feel shame with. And I'm like, who can I go to? Who can I talk about this with?
Yeah.
I should go get a therapist.
Yeah. Well, and that's a super safe way of going, right? Because then you have a transaction. You are paying someone for their confidentiality, and they're also to give you guidance through.
Correct. If anybody's got a good link to a therapist, let me know. I was just thinking about this. So obviously I've never been married. I'm curious.
To me, but maybe not everybody else.
Yes, correct. Just so everybody knows, no ring, never been married. But I am curious, in your marriage, or let's say this, so it's not so personal, in the how old are you?
54.
In the 54 years you've been alive, and in the marriages you've seen either be very successful or not very successful, how often does shame play a role in those marriages?
Wow. So, well, I guess I'm going to go to the negative side just because it's easier to identify.
Okay.
Of all the marriages that I know that have broken down and had severe problems, shame has been a big part of it.
Interesting. And so
on one or the other side, you know what I mean? Or both. But
and basically we're saying that in those relationships, if shame is a secret that you keep to yourself and you wrestle with it and you feel guilty for over and over and over again, you're saying that in a relationship, communication and having no secrets is like a key to having a healthy relationship. Is that what I'm picking apart?
That's such a big one. It has helped my marriage tremendously. We don't have any secrets from each other. But it wasn't always like that. So do
you find that your marriage is more happy and healthy and like worth having now or then?
100% now. I divorced the
like
guy.
No contest.
I married him. Until we did a lot of counseling, then I got on the other side of my stuff. But I think what I learned too is that we both brought stuff to the marriage, and
for sure,
the puzzle pieces fit. So we both had different things. It's like two sides of the same coin. My coin was screwed up and so was his, and it fit perfectly. So enabling us to really see what was going on. It took some uncovering to get to it.
I'm sure.
It was, I didn't, I had abandonment issues, which I didn't realize until I had them come to the surface in very sideways ways. I was afraid of being left. And so I ended up, doing things in the way I communicated and hiding and not wanting to be my full self because I was afraid that, I had shame. I mean, I was afraid that he wasn't going to love me if he really knew who I was at my core. And what the funniest part about that is now I'm way more myself. I mean, I would venture to say I'm pretty much myself all
I
the time.
agree.
But it's so much less effort. I'm not as tired because I'm just being myself. And then, I came to the conclusion finally, if he doesn't like me and he doesn't really like me, who I am, well, then he's not my person and I'll be okay. But it's not until you face that kind of tough truth that yes, some people are not going to like you, and it's okay if they don't like you, because you can't spend your life trying to please people so that they like you.
I agree 100%.
It's a waste of time.
I think that's part of the reason why a lot of the people that you see that are really successful in life always have very small groups of friends because they're very aware. I mean, I'm a person that is both wild and crazy and fun and communicative and vulnerable and loving. And not everybody's going to vibe with that.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. And it's not always, I think what people, especially young people,
okay,
tend to get into this conversation. Like if somebody doesn't like me, it's because there's something wrong with me.
mm-hmm.
So not true. Maybe
and then they go to the shame place,
people, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
And then they go to the shame place.
And then you go to the shame place, right? There's something wrong with me. I
mean,
high school is just like oh my gosh,
it's a crash course in shame, and they give you no training.
They give you no training. So true. So true. I mean, yeah, if there's one thing that people should be teaching their kids, if they're in high school, is to
shame resilience.
Yeah, shame resilience, and to just realize how valuable they are.
Yeah, and be 100% authentic to who you are, no matter what that is.
Yes, don't try to be. Yeah, I used to want to be a chameleon, like a social chameleon. I was with the jocks, and I was a jock around the jocks. And then I was, with all the drama kids, and I was like all drama around the drama kids. And I was in band, and I was on swim team and gymnastics. And clearly, as I look back on it, I was like trying to be everything to everyone. And I did have a lot of friends, which was great. But it's really interesting because over time you realize some people liked me because of the show.
Yeah.
It was the Karen show rather than really who I was.
Yeah. Well, one thing, if we're talking about high school, one thing I always found fascinating was the amount of people that would like do their little clique thing, right? And the one clique that I always loved so much were the goth kids with the freaking hair over their face, black hoodies on, freaking fat ass combat boots at school. I was like, dude, you guys are the coolest. You just do what you love and you don't care what anybody thinks. And I'm sure deep down it was like, somewhat of that and somewhat of like an establishment, like fuck you and all these different things. But there is definitely something to be said about those people and seeing them grow up. And those people are completely different than the popular kids, right? The popular kids are trapped by what everybody thinks of them. And I think that's why a lot of times in modern day life, you see people that are trapped in the cookie cutter neighborhood because they want the perfect lawn and the perfect wife and the perfect kids and the perfect schools and the perfect job. And it's all this facade to get other people to look at them and say, oh my God, they're the coolest. Oh my God, they're so successful. And it's really, and they're slaves. They're literal slaves to the game. And one of the coolest things that I'm learning is that the really cool people are the people that are like so understated and so just chill about what they do and who they are, and they're very understated people, and they're the people with freedom, right? And they're the people where, like, the people I look up to are the people that can do whatever they want whenever they want, and they're out of the matrix. They don't have anybody telling them what to do ever. They come from a place of fuck you, and it's the best. And those, I always wonder who those kids were in high school. Were they the emo kids? Because they might have been.
Who knows? They might have been.
I'll have to talk to some of them and ask.
I think that's good. So I'm listening to you as your mom, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm going to come into the conversation as a coach.
Got it.
Because I'm going to challenge you to say, even like when you were talking about the goth kids, you know, are one way and then the popular kids are another. High school is such a mishmash of people trying to figure out who the hell they are. And
good point.
Who, I mean, nobody gives you like a manual of how to do life. And everyone's trying to figure that stuff out. So some people are better at hiding it than others, which I'm challenging you to say, what story are you making up about whoever, whether it's the popular kids or the people who have the nice house in such and such a town with the great lawn and all that. They may be being themselves and they may not be.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I do agree with that. And I'm definitely generalizing, and I'm definitely putting people in categories, which I think is valid sometimes.
Sometimes. Well, and it's definitely helpful for our brains to figure things out quickly if we put them in a category.
Correct. Yeah. And honestly, at the end of the day, I'm totally fine with being incorrect and totally off base. And, you know, definitely challenge me, because that's where you learn and you grow. So I'll have to think about that, because I'm definitely putting these kids in categories that the popular kids are not being themselves, when in actuality, they could be the exact same being themselves as the goth kids, even though it just looks completely different.
Right. My guess is everyone's not being fully themselves in high school because they're all just trying to figure it out. So
yeah, it would be, what do you think high school would look like if everybody was just totally genuine?
Fame. Do you remember that show, Fame?
No. No, I don't.
It's an 80s show. Fame. Oh. It was like it was a show about all the kids who went to the School of the Arts.
Oh, okay.
that I make up in my head that was people really being themselves.
Oh, the art kids.
Yeah, performers.
How about that?
But probably not.
Probably. Oh, the performing kids were always so fun. All right, I want to find this quote that I read. This one's really good. So in Brene Brown book, Daring Greatly, I'm really into like the whole business category right now, and like trying to create like a culture that is healthy and thriving, and is one that is like open.
Yeah.
Okay. And in the book, she says the 4 best strategies for building shame resilient organizations, which I thought, like, you're just going to tell me how to do that? Like, how great is that? She gave me the keys to the kingdom right here. So I'm going to read them for you. Well, I'll just read. You what?
In a $10 book.
Yeah. And it's got a bunch of notes in it too. So thanks, Brene. Supporting leaders who are willing to dare greatly and facilitate honest conversations about shame and cultivate shame resilient cultures. Facilitating a conscientious effort to see where shame might be functioning in the organization and how it might even be creeping into the way that we engage with our coworkers and students. Normalizing is a critical shame resilience strategy. Leaders and managers can cultivate engagement by helping people know what to expect. What are the common struggles? How have other people dealt with them? And what have your experiences been? 4, training all employees on the differences between shame and guilt, exactly what you're talking about, and teaching them how to grieve and teaching them how to give and receive feedback in a way that fosters growth and engagement. The last 2, I think, are the 2 most important, because that is definitely something that in our family growing up has been cultivated over a number of years, where we are very, very good at giving and receiving feedback without it turning into like you're doing something bad.
Right. Without taking it personal.
Yeah. And
making it personal.
yes, that's what I'm saying. And without making it personal, where like you see somebody doing something and instead of saying you're doing this incorrectly,
yes,
and coming to it from the place of, hey, I'm seeing that you're doing it this way. I think there might be a better way to do it. Do you want to hear that?
Yeah.
And I think that right there is the critical aspect to getting to communicate with people in like, do you even want to hear what I have to say? Because if you don't, that's okay. And I won't tell you. And that's what Jordan Peterson talks about sometimes. But once they say, yes, I would love to hear it, then it takes the whole defensive mode out of it.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Well, and I think, like you're saying, that the defense mode is our automatic reaction to feeling attacked.
Yes.
And oftentimes people are not open to feedback because they've never received it in a way where it's not been a personal attack.
Correct, where it's constructive.
Right. So in an organization, you need to be able to teach your people that they can ask anything, and also you can ask anything, and it's not a reflection on who they are as a person. Like, because
I agree 100%.
Criticize the way, the guy screwed in the piece of drywall, or it's not even a criticism. It's like, hey, I want you to do it this way, not that way.
Correct.
That doesn't mean he's a bad guy and he, doesn't know how to, he's a bad drywall guy. It's like, no, that's not what that means. It just means I want it done like this.
Correct. Yeah. I did something the other day that I'm going to brag on myself a little bit here.
Okay.
I did something the other day that I thought was freaking stellar. I have a friend who is very near and dear to me, but over the past year or so, I've seen certain things in them that are not lacking, but like I've seen things in them that I think they agree that they would feel better if they did differently. Okay. And so I had a conversation with them the other day, and my greatest triumph over the past few months was this entire conversation. And I started it off by saying, look, I have some things to tell you that I think are important for you to hear. But before I tell you those things, I want you to know that number one, I have no judgment. And number two, that I love you irregardless of these things, and that it's important to me that you hear them from a place of love and because I think you could be better. And the whole conversation was a fucking 10. I mean, it was a 10.
Stop you right there. That was an amazing way to start a conversation. I mean, just freaking kudos to you that you had the ability to articulate that to another person before saying something. One, you asked permission, you set it up beautifully. There's going to be no judgment. If I say anything, please hear it in this way. This is my intention. Oh my gosh, freaking 10.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it was so much fun because all the topics that we had to talk about were really tough topics and could really cut somebody really deep.
Yeah.
And what was so neat was at the end of the conversation, it was like, I can't even describe it. It was like they felt like I was giving them feedback that was from a place of love, and they heard it. And it was actually really neat to hear, because then we went off and we had a great night, and it was awesome. And it could have very well have gone the other way without that communication beforehand of, this is how I'm coming to the conversation and this is how I want you to hear it. And yeah, it was actually really great.
Imagine the ripple effects of that. One, you modeled it for your friend. So now they know how to do that. And if they choose to do that in their other friend relationships or with their girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse,
Mhm.
whatever, moving down the road, you have modeled a way to give someone feedback that is important, beautifully. And gosh, that's just that gets me as your mom. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a beautiful human.
Yeah, you taught me well.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I've got one
What
more
else?
that I want to touch on. Um, let's see here. Oh, this one was really, really good. And so to preface this one off, I want to preface this one off by stating that so throughout my entire life, I've always wanted kids. You know this. And I've always wanted to have a family and a wife that I love tremendously and kids that I get to build into just absolutely stellar humans. It's my number one, it's going to be my number one greatest triumph. I know it. And so I read this the other day and was absolutely stunned because so often I see parents doing this where and it happened with us as kids. I don't have any specific examples, but I know it did, where like a parent will expect something, right? And the kid sees them actively doing something different than what they expect. And so like
Do as I say, not as I do.
kind of, yeah, we're like, let's say, well, I'll just give the example. So
Okay.
the thing that I want to share off is we can't give people what we don't have. Who we are matters immeasurably more than what we know or who we want to be, right? So who we are, what we do, the values and the integrity that we have is vastly more important than telling people who we are or who we want to be, right? Because everybody has these grandiose goals of who they want to be in life, but that doesn't make them that person, right? Because you're not that person yet because you haven't hit those goals. And the only way you can hit those goals is by actively every day doing the things to cultivate that person. And so the thing that I wanted to share was so like a parent will have like an aspirational value, right? Which is like gratitude and respect. And the practice values, which is like the daily life that they do,
Mhm.
is like teasing, taking for granted, or disrespect. And so I'll share this thing where it's so the aspirational value is gratitude and respect. But in the daily life, mom and dad themselves yell at each other and call each other names. No one in the house says please or thank you, including the parents, which is key. Mom and dad use put downs with their children and with each other, and everyone routinely teases family members to the point of tears. And so you have this culture, right, where the parent wants the best for their child because everybody does, and they want to teach gratitude and respect, but instead of teaching it through like showing them,
Right.
they just say, hey, you got to have gratitude and respect, and they beat it into them just by saying it. And
Yeah.
you and I were talking about maybe a month ago or something like that, is how like one of the coolest things about kids is how in tune they are with like absorbing knowledge, not like being told what to do, is being shown what to do. And I
Yeah.
think one of the neatest things that we had as kids is we had two parents that were incredibly good at showing us how to show up in different ways, right? I would not be the person I am today on my level of empathy had you not shown a level of empathy towards people and towards situations that, you know, was, just told,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
anybody can say, hey, you got to be an empathetic person. But
Right.
until somebody shows you
Yeah.
how to be an empathetic person,
Yeah.
it's like, where do I even start?
Yeah. I was having a conversation with Dr. Mary Miller not too long ago about fierce compassion. And we were talking about like, where do you learn to be compassionate with other people or have empathy? And my answer was from my mom, because she just was. She loved unconditionally. It didn't matter who you were. She loved you. She did it to the point of embarrassment as I was a kid. she would hug the clerk at the store if she felt like they were having a hard day. And I was like, why are you hugging them? Or she was always coming up with reasons why maybe somebody wasn't going through the yellow light when I wanted them to. And I was yelling at them with road rage in the car. And I'm like, why aren't you going through the light? And she's like, oh, maybe they have a bad back and they don't want to hurt themselves. Or maybe, they've got a child in the car or something. She always had a reason why somebody maybe did something. And it was just such a compassionate model for me. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, kids learn so much more from modeling. And I think that's why when all of a sudden you get to that time in your life where you realize something needs to change, it's like you're so much better off if you want your kids to be different, to change yourself and change how you do life, because they will, like you said, they will
automatically do it.
Yeah, they'll just absorb it.
And so where I was going with that is, aside from the kids, what is really cool is that humans in general are so good at pattern recognition that if you take these aspirational values, right, and you model them in your life, what's really interesting is how it affects your friendships and how it affects your relationships and how it affects all these different aspects of your life that you wouldn't necessarily think that it would, but all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, my friend group is a very loving friend group. And I'm not saying that they weren't a loving friend group before I was in the friend group, but I would definitely say that my being there has impacted the way that they communicate with people and the way that they share things and the way that we talk with each other, which is really neat. And it actually gives me great encouragement to start doing the things that I find valuable not in order to like affect other people, but by merely me doing the things that I find value in, that other people will get the value regardless.
Yeah.
Which is sweet.
Oh, that's really sweet. That's contribution. I mean, that's the stuff that makes us feel like our life has purpose.
Yeah, we hit that on last week's podcast, talking about the 5 basic human needs or something.
Yeah, 6 human needs, but yeah.
6 human needs, contribution. Yeah.
Don't forget about the 6th one.
Nice. Hell yeah. Yeah, so all in all, Brene Brown's book, Daring Greatly, is a 10 out of 10 recommendation. If you haven't read it, you got to read it. It will bring you to your knees in the best way possible.
Oh my gosh,
it's stellar. Do you have anything that you want to chat about?
I'm just so glad that she did the research that she did to come up with a way of talking about vulnerability and shame and making it normal for people, because like when I was going through my stuff, if I had that back in those days, so it wasn't that long ago, but
it felt like a long time ago.
2003, and she hadn't written the book yet, so it would have been helpful, to be able to put words to something that is very hard to explain to someone. Is beautiful. So I feel super grateful that she's done the work that she's done on it. And oh my gosh, it's coming out with more and more great books. So
yeah, I'm ready to read her next book. I haven't started it yet because I obviously haven't finished this one, but I'm really excited about it. What was I just about to say? I don't know. Should we do the outro?
Do it.
All right. If anybody is listening to this podcast, which I'm sure you guys are, if you found this conversation helpful in any way, please like, comment, subscribe, and share with somebody you care about. Please, please, please share this podcast to anybody that you think might gain value from it. And we're looking for somebody on our team that has experience in the creative side, doing like TikToks and Reels and different stuff like that. So if you know a person or are that person, reach out to us. We'd love to chat with you. And yeah,
And if
thanks
you
for
have
being here today.
questions that you want us, like topics that you want us to talk about.
Yes.
We love
Yes.
to chat.
We love to chat. And if you want to be on our podcast, reach out. We'd love to have you. We'd love to chat with you, learn about who you are and why you're fucking cool. And yeah, other than that, have a great day. We love you all.
Thanks.